Have you ever watched someone walk out of your life and felt like the ground disappeared beneath your feet? Have you ever prayed, cried, begged God to make them stay, only to watch the door close anyway? It hurts. It confuses you. It makes you question your worth. It even makes you question God. But what if the very thing that broke your heart was the hand of God protecting your destiny? Sometimes we think every loss is an attack. Sometimes we think every goodbye is the enemy stealing something from us. But not every removal is a punishment. Not every ending is a failure. Sometimes God removes people because they cannot go where He is taking you. You're praying for growth, but you're surrounded by comfort. You're asking for elevation, but you're connected to limitation. You're believing for purpose, but you're tied to distraction. And God, in His mercy, will start cutting what you're too afraid to release. We cry over the person who left, but we don't see the argument we were spared from. We mourn the friendship that ended, but we don't see the betrayal that was brewing. We fight to hold on, but God can see 5 years ahead. He can see the version of you that would have shrunk to keep them comfortable. He can see the compromise you would have made just to avoid being alone. Sometimes the removal feels like rejection. But rejection is often redirection. Think about it, when a branch is pruned, it looks violent. It looks painful. But pruning is not punishment, it's preparation. God cuts back what cannot sustain the weight of where you're going. He removes what would break under the blessing. You say, but I love them. God says, but they weren't ready for where I'm taking you. You say, but we had history. God says, but you have a future. You say, but I'm lonely. God says, but you're about to be aligned. Sometimes God will isolate you before He elevates you. He will reduce your circle to increase your clarity. He will remove voices so you can finally hear His. Because as long as you're surrounded by noise, you can't discern direction. And here's the hard truth: some people were assignments, not destinies. They were chapters, not the whole story. They were part of your process, but not part of your promise. If they walked away easily, let that teach you something. If they misunderstood you, let that grow you. If they betrayed you, let that refine you. Because God will never remove something good without replacing it with something greater, even if the greater thing is a stronger version of you. Stop chasing what God is removing. Stop begging for what God is breaking. Stop trying to resurrect what He buried. If He allowed it to leave, trust that it could not carry your calling. The pain you feel right now is not proof that God abandoned you. It's proof that He is rearranging you. Rearranging your relationships. Rearranging your environment. Rearranging your dependencies. Because where He's taking you requires different strength, different loyalty, different alignment. You don't lose people by accident. You outgrow them, or God protects you from them. And one day you will look back at the goodbye that shattered you, and you will whisper, "Thank you." Because what felt like subtraction was actually divine strategy. So if someone walked out, let them. If they misunderstood you, release them. If they couldn't celebrate your growth, bless them and move forward. God removes people for a reason, and that reason is always connected to your purpose. Trust the pruning. Trust the process. And most of all, trust the God who sees what you cannot. Sometimes removal is protection in disguise. When someone walks out of your life, your first instinct is to assume you lost something valuable. You feel the silence they left behind. You feel the absence in your daily routine. You feel the ache of what used to be. And because it hurts, you label it as harm. But pain is not always proof of damage. Sometimes it is proof of surgery. Sometimes it is evidence that God stepped in and cut away something you were too emotionally attached to release on your own. You don't always see the danger in what feels familiar. You don't always recognize the slow compromise, the small disrespect, the subtle draining of your energy. You adjust. You excuse. You tolerate. And over time, what once felt like love starts to quietly limit you. What once felt supportive begins to subtly shrink you. But because it didn't happen all at once, you never called it unhealthy. You just called it normal. God doesn't operate based on your comfort, He operates based on your calling. And when a relationship begins to conflict with your destiny, He will intervene. Not always with explanation, not always with warning, but always with intention. The very thing you were begging Him to preserve might have been the very thing blocking your growth. Think about how many times you prayed for clarity but ignored the red flags. Think about how many times you asked for peace but stayed in chaos because at least it was familiar chaos. Protection doesn't always look like a visible threat being removed. Sometimes it looks like a person losing interest. Sometimes it looks like communication breaking down. Sometimes it looks like doors closing without your permission. And in that moment, it feels personal. It feels like rejection. It feels like you weren't enough. But what if it wasn't about your worth at all? What if God saw the jealousy they would develop when you started succeeding? What if he saw the manipulation that would surface when you began setting boundaries? What if he saw the resentment that would grow when you stopped shrinking yourself to keep them comfortable? You see today. God sees 5 years from now. You see the memories. God sees the pattern. You see how much you love them. God sees how much they limit you. Protection often arrives disguised as disappointment. You don't celebrate it at first. You grieve it. You question it. You fight it. But later, when clarity replaces emotion, you start to connect the dots. You begin to notice how your peace increased, how your focus sharpened, how your confidence returned, how your faith deepened, and you realize that what left was also what was leaking. God will never remove something from your life without purpose. If he allowed it to exit, it's because it could not accompany you into what he has prepared. And sometimes the greatest act of love is not giving you what you want, but removing what would have broken you later. Rejection is often redirection, but in the moment it never feels that way. In the moment, it feels like a verdict. It feels like someone looked at you, evaluated you, and decided you weren't enough. You replay their words. You analyze their tone. You search for the exact moment it shifted. And without even realizing it, you start attaching their decision to your identity. You begin to question your value because someone else couldn't see it. But rejection is not always a statement about your worth. Sometimes it's a signal about your direction. You can be completely valuable and completely misaligned at the same time. You can be gifted, loyal, loving, and still not fit into a space that was never designed for your future. When someone walks away, it doesn't automatically mean you failed. It might mean the season has shifted. And when seasons change, certain connections cannot survive the climate. We assume that if something ends, it must be broken. But sometimes it ends because it has served its purpose. Some relationships are bridges. They help you cross into a new level of maturity, awareness, or growth. But you were never meant to build a house on that bridge. You were meant to keep moving. Rejection pushes you forward when comfort would have kept you stuck. If they had accepted you, you might have settled. If they had chosen you, you might have stopped striving. If they had applauded you, you might never have discovered the deeper strength inside you. Rejection has a way of awakening hunger. It forces you to look inward. It forces you to lean on God instead of leaning on approval. And that shift is powerful. Sometimes God allows rejection because he's protecting you from shrinking to fit into places that are too small for your calling. When you try to stay where you are not celebrated, you begin to edit yourself. You lower your standards. You dim your light. You silence your convictions, all just to maintain access. But the right direction will never require you to reduce who you are. Rejection also clarifies vision. When a door closes, it eliminates distraction. It removes options that were never aligned in the first place. It narrows your focus. And while narrowing feels limiting at first, it is often the beginning of precision. You stop chasing everything. You start pursuing what actually matters. You thought you were being pushed out. In reality, you were being guided forward. And here's the truth: if someone rejects the version of you that is growing, disciplined, focused, and faithful, that rejection is confirmation. It confirms that you are evolving. It confirms that your priorities are shifting. It confirms that you are no longer compatible with environments that thrive on who you used to be. Redirection doesn't always come with clear instructions. Sometimes it simply comes with a closed door and a nudge to trust God more deeply. And while rejection may bruise your ego, it strengthens your dependence on Him. It teaches you that your value is not determined by who accepts you, but by who created you. What felt like exclusion may actually be divine alignment. What felt like being pushed away may actually be God pulling you toward something greater. God prunes what cannot sustain your destiny, and pruning never feels gentle. It feels sudden. It feels sharp. It feels like something is being taken from you without your consent. One day everything seems stable, and the next day something is cut away. A relationship shifts. A friendship fades. A connection breaks. And you're left staring at the empty space, wondering why something that once felt good now feels gone. But pruning is not destruction. It is development. In nature, when a gardener prunes a tree, he doesn't cut the dead branches only. Sometimes he cuts healthy ones too. Not because they are bad, but because they are limiting the tree's ability to grow stronger and produce more fruit. The tree doesn't understand the cut. It only feels the loss. Yet the gardener sees what the tree cannot: the future shape, the increased strength, the greater harvest. God sees your future the same way. There are relationships in your life that are not evil, not toxic, not dramatic, just not capable of supporting the weight of where you are going. And if they remain attached, they will eventually snap under pressure. The higher you go, the heavier the responsibility. The greater the calling, the stronger the foundation must be. Weak connections cannot carry heavy purpose. Sometimes people are connected to you for who you were, not for who you are becoming. They relate to your past mindset, your old habits, your smaller dreams. But when God starts stretching your vision, increasing your discipline, deepening your faith, those same connections can begin to strain. Not because you are better, but because you are growing. Growth changes dynamics. You can't pray for elevation and expect every relationship to remain untouched. You can't ask God for influence while holding on to influences that dilute your focus. You can't step into greater responsibility while clinging to conversations that pull you backward. At some point, pruning becomes necessary. And pruning is precise. God doesn't randomly cut. He removes with intention. He knows exactly which branch is draining nutrients. He knows which attachment is dividing your attention. He knows which voice is quietly planting doubt in moments when you need confidence. Even if it looks small, even if it seems manageable, He sees the long-term impact. The painful part is that pruning can look like loss before it looks like progress. For a season, it may feel empty. It may feel like you have fewer people, fewer options, fewer comforts. But what you actually have is more space. More room to grow. More capacity to strengthen. More clarity to focus. And after the cut, something powerful happens. Your roots go deeper. Your resilience increases. Your dependence shifts from people to God. You become sturdier, more anchored, more intentional. God is not trimming your life to make it smaller. He is shaping it to make it stronger. He is removing what cannot sustain your destiny so that when the weight of blessing arrives, you won't collapse under it. Not everyone is meant to go to your next level, and the truth can be difficult to accept. We naturally want the people who started with us to finish with us. We want loyalty to mean longevity. We want history to guarantee future presence. But growth changes compatibility. And as you evolve, your environment must evolve with you. There are people who were perfect for who you were 5 years ago. They understood your struggles, your insecurities, your early dreams. They connected with the version of you that was still figuring things out. And there's nothing wrong with that. That season was real. That connection was meaningful. But seasons shift. And when they do, alignment shifts too. As you grow, your mindset expands. Your priorities sharpen. Your standards rise. The things you used to tolerate, you now question. The habits you once entertained, you now avoid. The conversations you once enjoyed, you now outgrow. And not everyone will be comfortable with that change. Some people prefer the version of you that was less disciplined, less focused, less bold. Not because they hate you, but because your growth confronts their stagnation. Your ambition challenges their comfort. Your faith exposes their fear. And instead of growing with you, they may resist you. You cannot carry everyone into spaces they are unwilling to prepare for. Elevation requires different conversations. It requires accountability, vision, maturity. It requires people who celebrate your progress instead of competing with it. It requires support that strengthens you, not subtle comments that shrink you. And if someone cannot adjust to the new version of you, they will naturally drift. That drift is not always dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet. The calls become less frequent. The energy feels different. The excitement fades. And you sense that something has shifted. That shift is often a sign that you are stepping into a new level. The mistake we make is trying to force old connections to fit new seasons. We overexplain ourselves. We minimize our growth. We downplay our goals. We act smaller to make others comfortable. But shrinking yourself to preserve a relationship will only delay your destiny. You are not called to abandon people, but you are called to obey growth. And growth will separate you from environments that no longer align with your direction. It's not about pride. It's about purpose. Some people were part of your preparation, not your promise. They helped shape you, teach you, stretch you. But they were never assigned to your arrival. And holding on to them out of guilt or nostalgia will only create friction in your future. When you step into your next level, your circle may get smaller, but it will also get stronger. Fewer voices, but clearer ones. Fewer connections, but deeper ones. And you will realize that God was not taking people away to punish you. He was adjusting your environment to match your calling. Not everyone can go higher with you. And that's not rejection. That's alignment. Isolation can feel confusing when you didn't choose it. One moment you're surrounded by conversations, connections, constant noise, and the next, it's quiet. The messages slow down. The invitations stop. The circle feels smaller. And in that silence, your mind starts asking questions. Did I do something wrong? Did I push people away? Why does it feel like I'm alone? But isolation is not always punishment. Sometimes it is preparation. There are things God can only build in you when distractions are removed. When the noise fades, clarity begins. When the opinions quiet down, His voice becomes clearer. When you are no longer leaning on constant validation, you start discovering internal strength you didn't know you had. We often confuse loneliness with abandonment. But there's a difference between being alone and being set apart. Being alone feels empty. Being set apart is intentional. It's strategic. It's purposeful. And sometimes God will reduce your circle so He can refine your character. In isolation, your identity gets tested. Without applause, do you still stay disciplined? Without encouragement, do you still stay faithful? Without people checking in, do you still show up consistently? Isolation exposes your motives. It reveals whether you were driven by purpose or by praise. Growth requires focus. And focus requires fewer distractions. When you're constantly surrounded by voices, it's easy to absorb other people's fears, doubts, and limitations. It's easy to adapt your vision to fit someone else's comfort zone. But when God pulls you into a quieter season, He is creating space for vision to expand. He is strengthening your ability to stand alone if necessary. Isolation also heals dependency. Sometimes we rely on people more than we realize. We look to them for reassurance, for decisions, for emotional stability. And while community is important, dependence can become unhealthy. When certain people are removed, it forces you to build deeper trust in God. It pushes you to pray more, reflect more, grow more. There is something powerful about learning to be secure in solitude. When you can sit in a quiet room and not feel incomplete, you've matured. When you can move forward without constant affirmation, you've strengthened. When you can keep building even when no one is watching, you've developed resilience. Isolation is where roots grow deep. Public success is built in private seasons. Confidence is shaped when no one is clapping. Discipline is formed when no one is checking. Character is refined when no one is observing. And God often develops your foundation away from the spotlight. It may feel uncomfortable now. It may feel unfamiliar. But this quieter season is not your downfall, it is your development. You are not being hidden because you are unworthy. You are being prepared, because you are called. And when the next level arrives, you will realize that this isolated season gave you the strength to handle it. Loss has a way of shaking your identity. When someone significant leaves your life, it can feel like they took a piece of you with them. If you were the one always supporting, always loving, always showing up, their absence can leave you questioning who you are without that role. If you were used to being chosen, being needed, being validated by their presence, their departure can feel like a verdict on your worth. But sometimes God allows a relationship to end so you can discover who you are without it. When someone exits your life, it exposes what you were leaning on. If your confidence drops the moment they leave, maybe your confidence was anchored in their approval. If your sense of purpose weakens, maybe you tied your identity too tightly to being needed. Exposure feels uncomfortable, but exposure is not humiliation, it is revelation. It reveals where your identity was misplaced. You are not defined by who stays. You are not defined by who leaves. You are not defined by who chooses you or who overlooks you. Your identity was established long before that person entered your life. And sometimes God will strip away external validation so you can build internal security. When the wrong voices disappear, the right voice becomes clearer. There are opinions that subtly shape how you see yourself. Comments that seem small but plant seeds of doubt. Expectations that pressure you to perform instead of simply be. When those voices are removed, you finally have space to hear truth. Not filtered truth, not conditional acceptance, but steady, unwavering truth about who you are in God's eyes. Loss forces you inward. It forces you to confront your fears, your insecurities, your patterns. It challenges you to grow beyond roles you once relied on. Maybe you were the fixer in every relationship. Maybe you were the peacemaker, the overgiver, the one who tolerated too much just to avoid abandonment. When that dynamic ends, you are faced with a choice: repeat the pattern or rebuild differently. Strength is formed in that rebuilding. Instead of chasing someone else's approval, you start developing self-respect. Instead of bending your standards to keep someone close, you start reinforcing your boundaries. Instead of asking, "Why wasn't I enough?" you begin asking, "Why did I accept less than I deserved?" That shift is powerful. Loss can refine you if you let it. It can teach you to separate your value from someone else's ability to recognize it. It can teach you that being alone is better than being misaligned. It can teach you that your worth is constant, even when your circumstances change. When you stop measuring yourself by who stayed, you start measuring yourself by who you are becoming. You begin to see that the end of a relationship did not reduce you, it revealed you. It showed you your resilience. It showed you your depth. It showed you your capacity to stand, even when something meaningful walked away. And in that standing, your identity becomes stronger than it has ever been. Divine subtraction rarely feels divine in the moment. It feels like loss. It feels like reduction. It feels like your world is getting smaller instead of expanding. Fewer people calling. Fewer invitations coming. Fewer familiar faces in your daily routine. And you begin to question whether you're moving backward instead of forward. But subtraction is not always a setback. Sometimes it is strategy. When God begins to remove certain people from your life, it's not because He wants you empty, it's because He wants you aligned. You cannot receive what He is sending if your hands are full of what He is taking away. You cannot build new connections while clinging tightly to old ones that no longer fit your direction. Subtraction creates space, and space is necessary for addition. We often ask God for increase in influence, in peace, in purpose, in opportunity. But we rarely consider that increase requires capacity. And capacity is created when unnecessary weight is removed. Every relationship carries influence. Every connection shapes perspective. And if certain influences are no longer aligned with where you are going, they will limit what you can carry. God is intentional about alignment. He understands that the right people will sharpen you, stretch you, challenge you in healthy ways. The wrong people, even if they are kind, even if they have history with you, can keep you tied to an outdated version of yourself. Divine subtraction is about removing misalignment before it becomes permanent stagnation. It may look like your circle shrinking, but it is actually becoming refined. Fewer voices, but clearer ones. Fewer opinions, but wiser ones. Fewer distractions, but greater focus. What feels like isolation may actually be filtering. And here is the powerful part: subtraction protects the addition that is coming. If certain people had stayed, they might have interfered with what God was preparing. They might have misunderstood it, competed with it, or even discouraged it. Sometimes God clears the environment before He introduces the promise. He removes what would contaminate the next season. You may not see the addition immediately. That's the hard part. There can be a gap between subtraction and new alignment. In that gap, doubt tries to speak. It tells you that you lost too much. That you should go back. That you should reconnect just to avoid the discomfort of change. But growth requires trust. Trust that what left had to leave. Trust that what stayed is meant to stay. Trust that what is coming will fit better than what you lost. Divine subtraction is not random removal. It is careful positioning. And one day, when the right people enter your life, people who understand your vision, respect your boundaries, celebrate your growth, you will see the wisdom in the removal. You will realize that what felt like emptiness was actually preparation. What felt like reduction was refinement. And what felt like loss was alignment leading you exactly where you were meant to be. If this message blessed you, share it with someone who needs it.